Welcome back to another episode of I'll Allow It, Nevada, a quick access judicial education podcast. I'm Anne-Marie Mayu of the Judicial Education Unit, your host. In this episode, we will be discussing Judicial Branch leadership, and my guest today is Katherine Stocks, Director and State Court Administrator. Welcome, Katherine.
Thank you for having me.
We have so many questions for you today. Let's start with, what is the role of leadership for the Nevada Judiciary today from where it was 3 years ago?
I got here in February of 2021, and one of the initial actions I was supposed to take was to develop a strategic plan for the entire state. Something that all court employees could feel comfortable with, and that was their plan that they created. One of the long-standing leadership issues for the state has been related to the turnover of the Chief Justice. Nevada's leadership for the judiciary as a whole has struggled over time due to the constitutional constraints of the term of the Chief Justice. Reading the Constitution, that was based off of a 3-person court. You have a 6-year term, but the last 2 years of your term, based on seniority, you're the Chief Justice. At some point in time, the court then amended that interpretation to be that each justice, now that there's 7, you either have 2 or 3 that are in their last 2 years at the same time. So each justice has been allowed to take a turn, and even once there was a period where you have the 3 that end up being in the term at the same time, where we had 8-month terms for Chief Justice. Administratively, leadership-wise, it takes 6 months for a Chief Justice to even really get the lay of the landscape, let alone effectuate policies or have some type of vision that they realize can be achieved.
Right.
So on that leadership principle, and I think we're going to have another podcast about the strategic plan, the leadership and strategic plan coincide.
Okay.
Where the court came together and said, hey, you're the brand new state court administrator, one of your jobs is going to be to develop a strategic plan. And a big part of that plan came out where interviewing all across the state, judges, court employees, attorneys, and then the court itself, the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals, was that there is a lack of clear leadership. And what do we do when we need help? How do we tell the story about what we're doing? This is where this idea of a 2-tiered approach of a strategic plan, plus also truly instituting a new view of leadership going forward. The 2 plans come together. They can't work in silos. They have to be units. But when you talk about leadership and you talk about, well, what does it even mean? What does leadership mean to me is probably different than what leadership means to you. In a modern workforce, in our goal as leaders to be an employer of choice, to want people to come to be a part of our judiciary, we want people to feel like they have leaders that truly believe in what we're doing. That's where this idea of looking at where we are today, where we were a couple years ago, and where we're going in the future. Over and over, the themes came out, like I said, about lack of consistent leadership. So what are the words that we're using to describe how we lead each other? Well, every single person in the organization is a leader. It just depends on the scope and the breadth of what you're leading, right? We all have a personal responsibility to be public servants. Part of this whole idea comes from is back 25 years ago, I read a book in an English lit class called Rereading America.
Okay.
In that book, lots of different stories, but for me, what I interpreted the book to be saying is that the way we lead or set expectations for how individuals are responsible for their own actions is how we are as an organization. So in one example, you have, the Montessori kids that are told to make their own choices and to make good choices, and then are responsible for their own actions. And then you have more of a command and control idea that in some schools you have, here's the rules, sit at your desk, do not move, fill out this sheet, do what you're told. So part of, each individual has their preference on how they want it to be. Not command and control versus freedom of choice don't work for everyone. So where is that middle, right? And that is the whole idea of the leadership, that it is our responsibility as the policymakers to allow each individual to choose how they want to act and how they want to be led. So we need to provide as many options as possible. Once you get to that point of realizing that not everybody wants to be managed or led or guided in the same way, is when the bigger piece of leadership really comes out. That's where looking at how, even if I say the AOC had a command and control structure. That command and control structure works very well in certain situations. If there are issues like, let's say, a clerk in a trial court gets an order to quash a warrant. If the clerk doesn't follow the procedures and appropriately quash that warrant, someone could lose their liberty. Not only is that against what we're doing in public service, against our mission and our values, it's also has significant liability on the court itself for the mistake that the clerk made.
Oh, absolutely.
So in situations like that, command and control does make sense. You do need processes and procedures. Right. In issues of where are we going and how are we going to serve the public, command and control doesn't work, because the ideas of how we could actually improve could easily be silenced because it doesn't fit in the parameters of how the rules are written today. So that's where we need to say, all right, in this role today, it does make sense. You need a process. You need to make sure that filings are processed appropriately so that the cases are able to be heard. Okay. That same responsibility falls on attorneys and litigants, that they need to follow those specific rules. But then we move to a leadership philosophy of providing autonomy. Where is autonomy appropriate for our individuals, each person as a leader? What is your level of autonomy in your particular role today? And those are the questions that we keep asking. And it's hard. It is very hard work to go from a structure of these are the policies and this is what we do for everything, or trying to create a policy for everything in case you miss something, versus going towards autonomy. And one of the universal issues that comes up when you move from command and control to autonomy, something like a dress code. Dress codes are so controversial. I've seen them in all different ways, and I'm sure you have too.
Absolutely, I have, yeah.
And so can you think of a dress code that you thought was just so onerous?
Yes, I can. At one point I worked for a law firm. They had an issue with tattoos. I had to cover up my beautiful flower tattoo, and I just find that to be a little imposing.
That is something where we get into individuals' values and beliefs.
Right.
And the modern workforce has different values and beliefs. And you had a prescriptive policy that instead of saying, hey, we are all here together and we're professionals and we have work to get done, the policy was focused on preconceived notions of what is or isn't appropriate for someone to choose for themselves. The policy was not focused on competency.
No.
So these are some hard conversations to occur. Came into one where even gauchos were listed as prohibited pants to wear, getting into very specific. And I asked, well, why do we list 25 different things you're not allowed to wear? Well, if we don't list it, someone's going to try to get around the policy and wear something we don't like. That is command and control.
Right.
A revised policy is based off of the autonomy to be responsible for your own choices and actions. So a revised policy says, wear what you find to be appropriate in a business environment. And then instead of becoming all about control and dictating and focused on a negative space, a negative connotation towards what someone wears or whether they have a tattoo, this is focused on you as an individual. What do you think is appropriate? And are you able to make those choices that are part of the social norms of what is appropriate today? There's also an example of wearing pantyhose in the workplace.
Right.
Right? So it's your choice. Do you find that it is appropriate at the time and place for that situation? That's where we're trying to go with the whole idea of leadership. Choosing such a hot button issue is dress code is one that can really set people off, but it's a good example because I really think it resonates with others as to, oh yeah, I have been there.
So I know that you've made a lot of those changes here. The majority reaction to those, what are they?
So in creating the policy, that was an interesting exercise as well.
I'm sure.
We were able to see the growth of individuals in trust in the organization, that if you bring up an individual preference or an individual concern related to this dress code that was being amended,
right,
some people didn't want to provide an opinion. We had others that volunteered. Oh, we would love to work on that. May we please? That was a sign that they trusted that the organization was moving away from command and control to trusting in the responsibility, trusting in the autonomy of the individual to come up with suggestions how to improve the system. In that instance, there were heated debates about jeans. Whether or not to put in proscriptive policies related to what the jeans look like. I have my personal opinion on what should have been there. The group came together and agreed that you still have to be specific about what is an acceptable status of a pair of jeans. I don't even know how to say it. But that was an interesting exercise to see the ideas of command and control versus autonomy and
right,
personal responsibility.
Right.
So from those bigger picture items, now looking back, that was 2 years ago, probably right at 2 years ago today, and seeing where we are now. It's so much of it is individual preference. And what I find freeing about that exercise was that individual chambers still control their chambers. They still have the say over what is worn and done and the norms, the practices and procedures within chambers. We wanted our policies to be able to allow each individual unit to decide what their values and vision are and how they view the importance of the dress code. So by making it a more open-ended policy, you allow each group to come together and decide as a group what their values are. And that is the basis for where we're trying to go for all of this. If we can make a change in a very small policy but has significant impact on the individuals, where do we go from there? Right, that's the next question. Getting trust that you can change the dress code and the world does not implode.
It doesn't affect the work.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So once we get to there, the question is, like, what do we do next?
Yeah.
And that's where then the idea of what is our purpose in the AOC? The purpose before had said our mission is to serve the Supreme Court of the state of Nevada. We had Supreme Court Rule 44 that was very clear that the AOCs, especially, we have rural court coordinator. We have positions that touch the state and the trial courts, every single one of them. Well, those positions were very restricted in what they could say or do with the courts outside of our appellate court family. The Supreme Court amended Rule 44, and now we actually are allowed to go out and assist. When we are asked for help, we are allowed to now provide it officially instead of what might have done unofficially that I know nothing about. That's where then we look at, well, what is the mission of the AOC? Now the Supreme Court has said, you know what, times have changed. We do need to have more of an outward focus. We have a duty to help where help is wanted. We don't have a duty to tell courts what to do. We have a duty to provide support and resources as requested. And that's where then the mission has moved from serving as support for the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals for the state of Nevada to serving all courts in the Nevada Judiciary. So from that leadership perspective, this is really where that autonomy comes in, because we allow our individuals to provide direct support to the trial courts without having to come back necessarily and get permission for what's happening every single time. So, okay, well, if you're in that piece where individuals have autonomy to support the courts that ask for it, how do we know that our employees are doing what they're supposed to be doing? That's where, one, we put in the guardrails. And this is where individual conversations, group conversations, and what is our culture come into play on that leadership role. So from prescriptive policies to guardrails. Those guardrails give our individuals the parameters to safely act, to safely provide information, to safely provide advice and support to our trial courts within the parameters to know these are things that I am empowered to do. The guardrails are this next phase. We're still working on guardrails, still working on getting our team and our culture there to know that it is normal to have the guardrails, but there are times when you do need to move it up, and you do need someone that has a higher level of responsibility to guide you and help with the decision-making process. So if I turn it on you and say, with judicial education, have you seen a transition in what you do? Have you seen guardrails? Have you as a team built guardrails?
Absolutely. I've been here and have had the pleasure of seeing that policy change to the guardrail system. And as a unit in judicial education, we definitely have seen a switch. And for me, it's more motivating. It's more because I feel seen and heard as an employee. And I would imagine that would also translate to the courts. They feel seen and heard if the message of what you're trying to do with the guardrails is getting across to them, if they are hearing that. That's important.
Thank you. I kind of knew judicial education was doing well, and it just, as a team, you meet weekly and talk about what's going on.
We do.
And that's something where this hybrid work, or larger teams, how can we get everybody together if we have people working remotely? Those are some of the challenges we're facing right now. Some of the questions we're still working on, but having those guardrails and setting an expectation, that's really where we need to go. There can be very difficult conversations then that come with having guardrails instead of clear rules. But like I said, in some instances, like quashing a warrant, those need to be very clear rules about what you do.
There has to be a directive in there. I think you use the word guardrail. I think more in judicial education, it's just communication, but it's more of, let's just talk about what's happening and talk through it.
That's a really good way to put it that I hadn't even thought when I'm talking about the guardrails and knowing when you need to move up or ask for support from someone that has more decision-making responsibility. Mm-hmm. You're right. It comes down to communication. And I don't want to be surprised. I don't want to get a question that the justice calls and says, hey, this is going on, what are you doing about it?
Right.
That's one of the worst feelings in the world, is I don't know. Oh, let me look into this. Please let me look into this, and I will get right back to you.
Right.
When, to your point, if there had been that communication, no surprises, right?
Right.
I like surprises for birthdays. I don't like surprises when I get a phone call that says, did you know this was going on? What are you doing?
Right.
And that's a really good point to that, of setting that expectation that there is the trust and the autonomy. And that goes back to autonomy if it's the responsibility of the individual to communicate up and to say, hey guys, and also communicate to your team, just so you know this might come up. That's such a good way to put it. But that's how this whole process works. We're doing exactly what I'm talking about, that we are trying to make an institutionalized norm. It takes a while.
Well, but it's also refreshing, and I'm sure that you've seen the positive outcome of it. Change is hard. And it's funny, as much as I appreciate the atmosphere now so much more, I still find myself struggling a little bit, going, no, but this is how we used to do it, and just struggling because that pulls me in that direction.
And that's where we get into those habit loops. I have no therapeutic background. I can use words, but I might be wrong in what it means. I just know that, especially, we're just coming off of session. 120 days of intensity. We started working on the budget in February of 2022, right? So months and months and months went into getting to even putting in legislation in our budget. And then the speed of the session and the stress level, and different times, some of us just were like, and you go right back to those old habits and the old thought patterns of, it's stress. And a big part of that leadership piece is allowing the team to be okay not being okay. Man, I need a break today. There are days when it just gets really nuts, and our brains it's too much.
It's true. Sometimes you just hit your wall.
So, okay, next step on the leadership piece.
Yes.
Is then, once we get the trust and the relationship built, that it is safe to communicate, it is safe to make your own decisions and just let people know what's going on, is then telling the story of our good work. And that's where setting the example of some questions that have come up. Well, why do you want that data? What do you do with all that data we give you? Why as an individual out in a trial court or a court clerk running juries, why do I want to provide AOC information? Well, our traditional response has been, well, statutorily we're required to collect it, because that's true. It says the court administrator shall. And the court administrator shall publish an annual report. Well, that's where the data and the statistics go. We aren't able to really even tell a story with that information. So I understand why courts are like, why do I even do this? Stats are a pain. I don't like doing them. Well, we have 15 different case management systems. Some people have to do manual stats because they can't even pull them. I wouldn't want to be doing it either. So that's where we move from, why are we doing it? Oh, because the statute says we have to then telling the story of our good work. Data is an extremely powerful tool. I have seen the power of data to tell funding authorities, to tell the public the great work that we do in the judiciary. We in the AOC get aggregate data. We don't get individual data. It is very difficult to tell the story about what good work the courts do. That's where we're going. We're going to the data repository that we got federal funding for. That was an aspiration of, wouldn't it be amazing if we could have a repository, and then we could actually look at data and say, you know what, you are doing so well here. Let's let the public know. Let's let our commissioners know. See how well we're doing. We are resolving cases. We are actually handling post-adjudication motions very well. So when parents are in high conflict over a parenting plan, we're getting there and we're getting it done. Look at how well we're doing in guardianship now. These are the things that we would like to be able to show our work and really tell the positive story. Because when you meet with judges one-on-one, when you meet with court staff one-on-one, everyone has a really good story about something they've done that it makes them feel good and makes that individual more motivated to continue to be a public servant. We have very basic information now, and it's hard to tell the story. And we ask, hey, trust us, it'll be great. That's not how we get trust. We have to actually be able to have a couple successes in telling the good story of our court's work. And then we start to slowly gain that trust from the courts. We have to gain the leadership and the trust internally first, and then we can start gaining more trust going out. We have individuals in the AOC that have trust throughout the state. As an entity, I don't know that we have that same level of trust and respect. So it's through those current positive relationships, but really being able to tell the story of the good work of the courts, that we will eventually, little by little, garner more trust and respect to then have data collection or, the AOC is here, why are they here? It's not because someone's in trouble. The AOC is here because we're working together to tell the good story of our deeds.
You hear a lot about public perception of the judiciary, and it's not in a real great place right now. But it kind of sounds like you're talking about our public, and I'm going to just define our public as our courts outside of the Supreme Court of Nevada. Their perception of the AOC Supreme Court of Nevada is not real great either, and it sounds like you're trying to change that. Really, any organization trying to make a difference in motivation and connect and trust, it's one person, one court at a time, one story at a time. It's going to take that time to kind of build that. Once the courts see another court being given kudos about, something great they did, then everyone's going to want to be on board. They're going to be, but what, look at what we did, and it's infectious. It's going to happen.
That's where we get to, instead of no but, I like your idea, but,
right,
to yes and. That's when the true shift has happened. When we can walk in and have a conversation, we can get together and have a conversation, and as a group, the conversation, we're listening to understand. And that's what we have to be able to really get across, is that we're listening to understand, we're not listening to respond. In times of stress, it's way easier to listen to respond. Yes, but, have you thought about this? These are all the things that have happened before. This is what they're going to say. And one that I have heard over and over has, yes, but I am up for election. Not yes, and I think I have an example of something good that I did. That's when we will have gained that trust and the buy-in that what we're trying to do is to tell our good story. We have a responsibility. The purposes and the responsibilities of courts are to give each case individual attention. That doesn't mean give each case the same amount of time. That's individual attention based on the complexity of the case. Telling those stories becomes so influential. Because if we have someone with a very easy case to resolve, getting that resolved quickly so they can say, you know what, I handled it, I had never dealt with the court before, they got it done, now I can move on with my life. Those are those stories that help then improve the public perception, right? So individual attention. We have a duty to be impartial. We also have a duty to appear impartial. That's where that public perception piece really comes in, and telling the stories of our good work matters. Because perception, I perceive that the courts are tied in with law enforcement and they are just doing whatever law enforcement says. Well, what about that perception where you say, okay, can you tell me a little bit more about that? And then oftentimes it's an individual story. Well, my next door neighbor, or my cousin, or so much of it comes back to the individual and the individual's personal experience. That's where we're going, is telling the story of the individual so that they're able to say, you know what, I had no idea what I was doing, but someone referred me to that self-help portal. And then it had a guided interview. I don't know, I just went in and I clicked yes, no, put in my name, and then next thing I know, I have a document that I'm supposed to give to the court. That's where we want it to go of, oh, you know what, it wasn't that difficult. I was so confused and scared, and the court helped me. Because that goes back to that whole idea of perceiving to be impartial, especially when you have individuals that aren't represented by counsel, and then the other side does have counsel. This could get me going on like a whole nother podcast about what is our duty to serve the public, and are we a service, or are we a building, or are we both?
The message that I'm hearing from you today, Katherine, is that we want to be there for support to those courts as a service to them. So the Nevada Code of Judicial Conduct 2.5a requires judges to perform administrative duties competently and diligently, and Rule 2.12a requires judges to properly discharge supervisory duties. How do these relate to judicial branch leadership?
That is a very good question. When we look at trial courts, there's usually 4 different types of cultures that those courts have. It's actually a great book called Trial Courts as Organizations, and it talks about that internal culture and how the judges and court staff like to interact. So Rule 2.5 in leadership comes in, especially when you have courts that are heavily reliant on personal relationships. It is a lot harder to supervise and monitor the performance of someone that you have a direct personal relationship with. And that's where it can be difficult for everyone. A complaint comes in about something happened, oh, well, that person is just being dramatic, or it's easy to get jaded and say, you'll have someone come in, well, the clerk said I get to do X, and the judge knows the clerk did not say that because it's so out of bounds. But when you have a very close relationship, when there are things that require the judge to actually administer and supervise, it can get skewed, and the judge might not necessarily be as objective as they would be when they're presiding in the courtroom. We want to trust. We want to trust the people that we're close with. So especially in smaller courts, you have a very tight-knit group. You have to be able to trust those individuals to be providing you the right information and doing the right thing. That's where our audit function can come in and really help. We just got 10 more auditors, so we will have a team of 13.
Nice.
The AOC has a duty under Supreme Court order to audit our courts, and we just haven't had the people to do it. Our audits aren't about punishment. It's not about that command and control piece. It's about having the appropriate minimum accounting standards, which are guardrails, in order to ensure that the court's business processes are assisting the judge with Rule 2.5. Judges are not expected to be CPAs to know if something's going on. That's why we have our auditors. That's why they're here. They can come in and work with the court. And I've gone on the audits. I've seen how we do it. It is a conversation like you and I are having right now.
Oh.
It's, okay, yeah, let's see how you do that. Ooh, okay. Well, that particular thing you're doing right there, that could make you lose your ability to keep a credit card. Like, it's called PCI compliance, and that's what the auditors will say, hey, if you could get dinged for this and not be able to process credit cards in the future. That business process you have right there, how you're doing your daily closings. A lot of these courts don't have proper training in how to do daily closings or how to reconcile. But under Rule 2.5, the judge actually technically could be doing that administrative work, and that's not the highest and best use of our judges. So that's you just gave me a great segue of how we are truly here to assist the courts to do their work, because a judge cannot be an expert in everything.
Right.
We have people that actually is their career, and they are subject matter experts, and they're available to support the judge so that Rule 2.5 doesn't come back. And that's part of this whole idea of leadership by example. Once we've had a couple good audits, I personally get notes from judges of thanking our audit team for coming in and providing the guidance that they did, because it wasn't an adversarial process. It was an iterative process, working with the court how to get better. Because it still goes back to that fundamental idea of deep down, we all really want to do a good job. But do we have the tools and the training to do it? I would say it is not fair to expect that a judge has all of the tools and all of the training to supervise what's happening in their courthouse into every little detail. Because when would you ever actually then be on the bench resolving cases, which is what you're there to do, resolving disputes, which is a core function of a judge.
So Katherine, we've discussed a little bit about where we've come. You've shared a lot about some of the changes that have been made and where we're at now. Where do you see us going? What does the future look like?
As an influential and respected voice for the Nevada Judiciary, the courts are comfortable and take action to reach out to us when they have a question or they need support. I think it's that simple.
Yeah, that is simple.
And that takes years. It's been, proven. It takes 4 to 5 years to truly change a culture.
Yeah.
So little by little, we've been changing the internal culture, and then we're branching out to change the external culture. We also have to prove it by having some wins. We have to show that we can do what we say we're going to do. And that's where we are right now. I appreciate the question, because that's really where we're going as an influential and respected voice. We want people to want to call us.
All right, you heard it. Increase that communication, call and email whenever you have a question. I want to thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to I'll Allow It Nevada, Episode 2, Judicial Branch Leadership. Please keep in mind we will be publishing a new episode once a month on the third Friday. If you are interested in receiving continuing legal education, fill out a certificate of attendance and email it to jepodcast@nvcourts.nv.gov. I'm Anne Marie Mayu, your host. Take care.